Here we are. We have a recording again. Last module, operations with domains. This is, I'm not sure, let's say, this is something that I am not 100% sure if we want to keep doing this. I have heard conversations that we are somehow moving away from this. But we also know that there are lots of partners that, at least from the past, have been doing domains, have been selling domains, have been hosting domains. And even though we're moving towards a SaaS-based world and not a website in their own data centers world, some of these SaaS services do require domains, or make it easier if you work with domains, right? So that is why I still want to discuss operations with domains in this story. So the content of this module, operations with domains, what are the operations that we can do? We talk about a little bit about DNS hosting and domain registration. And then there is this little chapter about SSL certificates in there as well. That doesn't look like an operation with a domain, I agree, but I have a feeling that it was sneaked in here by somebody, because we wanted to talk about the fact that we can do SSL certificates, but we did not want to make a slide deck with only 2 slides, because that's about the amount that we have for an SSL certificate. So let's look at the operations with domains. When you work with a domain registration requires, of course, an owner, a validity period, who's the registrar, and of course the key thing is, where is this domain hosted? What are the name servers that are responsible for that domain? And here you see a domain name that we used to have. I'm not sure if we still have it, but it was learn-cloudblue.com. We had our sandboxes on there. We had our lab guides on there. We have changed that principle, because we don't do sandboxes anymore, because everything is going towards the SaaS scenario. But this used to be our actual WHOIS registration. So what can you do when you own a domain, or what can you do with domains in general, right? You can register a domain, which means that you can now use that domain and set up your domain zone on a DNS server, which means that people are able to resolve your domain and use the use specific A records, CNAME records, MX records, etc., etc. Sometimes part of that is handled by your provider, is handled by another entity, or is mandated by a SaaS service. Let's be honest, if I'm the owner of Denecamp.net as a domain, and if I would want to use my domain for email, of course I need to know what the MX record is from my email provider. I can search for that, I can ask it, but I can also have my email provider host my domain, which means that they will, if they update it, I don't need to do anything manual. I don't need to receive emails on that. They just do it, right? When you use a domain, especially in, for instance, the Microsoft world, for Microsoft 365, for Azure, etc., you always have to prove that you own that domain. When you register the domain through the Cloud Blue Commerce platform, that is easy, because when we get all that information back from Microsoft, the platform will now know what to create, which MX records to create, which TXT records, if applicable, we need to create, etc., etc. So there is no work for you. However, if you register your domain elsewhere and you still want to buy your Microsoft 365 subscription through Commerce, it means that you place your order. You can specify that this is your domain, that domain is registered elsewhere, and you will receive information that what you have to do for your domain to prove that you are the owner. And the assumption here is that they want you to make certain changes to your DNS zone, because only the thought is that only the domain owner could make those changes. So that is what you can. And of course, if needed, you can transfer a domain from one hoster to another or whatever. So what happens if we want to register a domain? Of course, we need a contract between the provider and some domain registry, sometimes multiple, depending on which top level domains you want to host or want to register, be able to register through your platform. The provider maintains the platform. The registry maintains the registrar, and the platform requests at the registrar. That's not strange. What happens there is that the domain will be registered. We go through the steps, I think, a little bit further. No, we don't go through the steps. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's not that important. But the request goes the registry, and the registrar verifies if the domain is not taken yet. If it's not taken yet, you get the authorization to start using it. Of course, we can also transfer a domain. That means that we move it from one place to the other. What we need in most cases is a transfer key, a transfer code to authorize this. If I want to transfer it into Cloud Blue Commerce, I have to have a code from my other owner, from the previous registrar, so that I prove that I enabled this transfer and I approve this transfer as well, because it's the customer that is in charge of his domain, right? In the fact where we do a domain registered elsewhere, of course, we need to manually update it. So if we register a domain, the next step is where it's hosted. If you register the domain by the domain usage through the platform is able to manage that domain again, meaning that it will update the domain records on name servers, it will manage contact information, it will manage the appropriate records that are needed for your services. So that is where we end up being in DNS hosting. In DNS hosting, we have, and there's a lot to read. I'm not going to go through all those slides, but because I will give it to you and not everything is very relevant to discuss it very, very, very deep. But what we want, of course, the platform supports DNS hosting. That means you have to set up your DNS servers. You can use Azure DNS if you want to. Our idea is, of course, to have redundancy, so set up 2 more servers. Make sure that you have the appropriate resources set up. If I want to host my domain, I need to have the resource for DNS hosting, and I need to have a product where I buy that template. So that is a key thing. If I don't have those resources, I can register the domain, but the platform cannot put it on his servers. Of course, we can use external servers as well in that case. Besides that, we support reverse DNS. Reverse DNS, of course, is one of the solutions. Or I would not, maybe not even say one of the solutions, part of the solution for anti-spam. Customer says, hey, or a mail server says, hey, I'm the authoritative mail server for whatever, Denecom.net. We do a reverse lookup of the IP address where this message comes from and verify the name, and we see that it's a completely different name and that it's not the MX record. That would at least give me the idea that we can discard this message. Adding a domain. What do we do when we look at, oh, here's that thing that I have. Adding a domain or transferring from another domain, how does it work? Well, in the domain registration process, what happens is we have let's remove this one. We have UX1 where we want to request a new domain. That happens in billing. And in billing, we have what we call domain gate. And this one has been discarded. These were C++ plugins. We don't have them anymore. So what happens is billing hands it over to operations. Operations has the domain plugins. That means that there is a plugin for GoDaddy domains. There is a plugin for, well, whatever you want to do. And you configure each plugin which top-level domains should go where. So if I have two domain registrars that I have a contract with, I have to choose, and both are offering .com domains. You as a seller, and in most cases as the provider, need to select, okay, where are we going to do .com domains? Okay, we do it with, let's say, GoDaddy. Then we have the .net domain. Who do we do that with? Okay, we do that with Tucows, etc., etc., etc. So there can only be one top-level domain bound to one plugin, making sure that the system doesn't need to make a change, right? Or a selection. This arrow is also not there. I'm going to do the request. In the meantime, I'm also setting up the domain on my name servers. Why are we doing that? Because a lot of registrars do a quick lookup to see if you are able to host that domain as well. So before I registered my domain, the name server already has that zone. That zone is in the pending status or something like that. I don't remember the actual name, but it's at least not in an active status, but it is answering to the registrar that, yeah, I have that domain already. Domain registrar gives the approval. At that moment, the domain plugin talks to the name server and says, now this is an active domain. Which plugin is using what? In operations, under services domain registrars, there's your registrar tab, and in the TLD, top level domain tab, you will see which top level domain is handled by which domain registrar. In this case, you see there's a lot of dummy. We have a dummy thing so that we don't have to actually talk to GoDaddy, not to have to talk to Tucows, etc., but we can still mimic this. For production, of course, you will find the real names there. This is not applicable anymore. If you want to have domain registration, there are a couple of things you need to make sure of. The first one is that you have the domain SDK host. This is still a server role. We are converting that to a Kubernetes setup. On that SDK, we need to set up the respective plugins, meaning the plugins of those registrars that you want to communicate with, set up the top level domains, and then create a domain registration service plan. That is actually the story that I wanted to talk about. There's a lot more information in this slide deck that I think is not relevant, because this is an older deck. The only thing I want to look at is the troubleshooting flow quickly. If domain registration fails, I would say you start in the middle. You always start in the middle. Why? Because in this case, the middle is the order that failed. So you go to that order and see what happened. What is the feedback? What did we see? What did we get back from the system? If we see connectivity issues, you go this way. Connectivity, can we reach it? Or and if we can reach it, if we cannot reach it, okay, let's troubleshoot that, right? Probably that is the issue. If we can reach them, is it authentication? Did we make a typo in the authentication towards the domain plugin? If all this checks out, we have to go through the other route. Contact the registrar, but most of the time in that failure, we see what is there. Oh. In the provisioning items, we see what was done. And in this case, there are 4 steps, but the first step, domain registration, failed. The registrar did not accept the request on name server creation. That means that somehow the system did not recognize our servers. Okay, let's troubleshoot that. For the SSL certificate, like I said, it was 2 slides. I was wrong, it's 4 slides, but we still don't create a scenario for 4 slides. And again, this is also getting less and less important because I think we still have DomainGate, but we do not have CertGate anymore. SSL certificates is also going towards a Connect connector, making it easier, making it better to keep up to date. So what was the old process? And you might still have some of that. This is the control panel where I want to buy a certificate. In billing, we go to CertGate. CertGate has a plugin for the specific certificate authorities where we get send out where the authority sends a confirmation request, a request for confirmation, that is. So this is where things might go wrong because this is the story a little bit more in depth, where the confirmation request is an email that we send to the, let's say, owner of, or the potential owner of that certificate. And we have seen that sometimes the title in that email is not a correct one. People think that this is a confirmation, so they store the email and think, okay, we're done. And then it takes time and nothing comes in, and then they ask for troubleshooting. The thing is that in this request, there is a link that they need to use to confirm that they indeed want this certificate. So they need to do this confirmation. It's either an email or it's a link that they need to press and approve something, and then they can get the SSL certificate content back. For the rest, there is not that much to do before the weekend anymore. It's almost past. It's for you almost time to go for lunch. For me, it's time to start celebrating the weekend. What questions do you have on DNS and SSL stuff?
None, but I have questions about the reseller part, which was what I was waiting for.
Yeah, it's the last session.
Oh, it's the last session. It's not today. Okay. Oh, there is
It's the
another
last
session?
session. So you have to keep your eagerness. 2 more sessions.
Ooh. Ooh, okay. We have 2 more sessions. I forgot that. I don't know why I thought this was the last session. Sorry about that.
No, it is not. You still, or you can still enjoy my voice 2 more sessions.
Got it. Well, for this part, I have no questions. We will be seeing anything about SDKs, domain SDKs and stuff? No, right?
No.
Okay.
The thing in the SDKs is they're pretty well described in our documentation on what we have available. At least from a domain perspective and from a payment plugin perspective. We realize that the APS API documentation is a little bit less good. So we are working on, or at least my team is pushing to get that information out in a better way.
Okay.
So we're working on that.
Yeah, well, this is the next question that I have, because for the Connect part, we have the Ansible to load the APIs, and we don't have that for commerce, right?
No, well, I'm wrong. This is, you put me a little bit in a difficult place, because we do have
Then,
an API description that is of what we call simple API, and simple API is actually a layer on top of APS API. Simple API we created to build quick integration, or at least good integration, with e-commerce systems outside of Cloud WooCommerce. The downside of that is that the simple API version that we have now is not fit for the latest rating engine. So we are pushing the simple API team to come up with support for that new rating engine, so that we can start pushing simple API again. And because why do we do that? Because simple API, let me pull up our documentation. Let's do that. And simple API is a component, is not something that, and I don't know why, but it's not found here. But under components, there is an option called simple API. And simple API has its own portal where you can download the YAML file and the procedures for everything. And they have a good specification. So the downside of this is, if you have the latest rating engine, there are some hiccups that happen. So eventually we want to push everything away from APS API into simple API, not because APS API is bad, but it is so powerful that most people are not ready to integrate with that one yet. And we have that, let's say, the name says it all. We have a simpler layer on top of that.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, it's just the simple API doesn't have everything that we need.
No, I was afraid that would happen. Yeah, and that's, of course, here you can download the specs, but it's not either or, right? So you can use simple API for the stuff where it's fit, and then use the APS API for, let's say, the rest. But yeah, I agree with you that, first of all, we don't have a full description of the API itself that we can download, that we can import in either what's it called, Postman or Insomnia or whatever. So it's harder to test things, to figure out things. Besides that, the documentation is not always completely clear. We realize that we have run into that ourselves internally as well. So internally, we're also pushing for improvement on those fronts.
Okay. Would you mind sending me this URL so I can download this simple API one? I didn't know that I would be able to do that for the simple API either. I didn't know that was available.
There it is. There's the link, and the one is in the API specification. It's up here.
Okay.
All right. For the rest, I want to thank you for being here again this week. I see you on Tuesday, if I'm correct. For the fourth session.
Let me check. Yes, so. You see us on Tuesday. Yes.
Yeah.
But okay, it's the last session. It's the last session, right? Tuesday.
No, it's the 4th session and we have 5.
I don't have another one in my calendar. I just have this one,
Okay.
I think.
So it's good that you mentioned this, because in that case you would have missed the last one. Let me quickly check. We have one on next Tuesday.
Yes.
And then since it would have been on the 9th, but the 9th for us is a national holiday, so we moved that one to the 13th. Can you verify if you have it on the 13th?
Oh yeah, it's here. Yay. Okay. Because it's usually in the same week. That's what I.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's here.
was
It's
indeed
here.
it was a national holiday for us there.
Okay, got it.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend when you're ready, and
Thank
see you next
you.
week.
See you when I see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.